for you as what you sort of put together Te Tarakia Tāwhiri with your team in Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum, but we as politicians really kicked off some of the main components to that just before lockdown. So like 2 weeks before lockdown, I think we passed the halving our emissions by 2030, which was really exciting. Then bam, lockdown, and then we had to try and work together to keep everyone on board that climate change was just as important as fighting this pandemic. So what was, I guess, your thoughts or concerns during this year for climate on top of a pandemic?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and 100%, there's been a lot going on. 2020, year of COVID was massive, but I think the critical thing for me was how do we get people, Aucklanders, yourselves, your colleagues, kind of recognising that, what COVID's provided is an opportunity to rethink. Fundamentally it's a pause, it's a stop, and now we have to build back, which is the phrase that we're using a lot of. But how do we build back better? How do we address those climate challenges that we face, meet the targets that we've set, whilst also building a better city, building a better region, building a better future for our people? And COVID's provided that opportunity because it's meant that we've had to stop and think about doing things very differently. Because I think, when we think about climate change and when we look at the plan, we've got some pretty big targets, that halving emissions in the next 10 years is one of the big ones. And net zero by 2050, that's not to be sniffed at. But we're not going to do it by just electrifying what we currently do, and that's the opportunity that we need to grasp, really, with two hands.
I think that's one of the things that people miss is that it's not just electrifying our buses or even electrifying our car fleet. It's actually reducing our trips and movements. If we don't need to leave home or we don't need to get in the car or whatever, that's actually the best cure for the emissions in a sense. And so I think lockdown, showed us what we could do and what we're capable of, but I'm just hoping that the public who choose to or are able to work from home and businesses allow staff or workers or our community to stay at home if they want to and have that flexibility, because I think reducing those trips is going to help with congestion, but it's also going to help with reducing emissions much faster than hoping the government act on EVs in the next 10 years, I guess.
Because there was, and my reflection on the last year, and it would be great to get your thoughts on, things that helped your colleagues, the other politicians, like that light bulb moment that, council has a big role to play, massive role to play in terms of our planning, where we're growing, how we're growing, public transport service, but actually there's a whole bunch of other actors, other people, other organisations that really need to do that as well and get on board, because we can't do everything ourselves, right? And I think for me, when we talked about transport, and we kind of recognised, and I think we presented on the Times for committee, and I think there was a point where we were like, 40% is transport, but actually buses are a very small fraction of that. Yeah. So it goes back to that private vehicle travel. How do we get people to think differently about how they move around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the 10-year budget, and we'll be getting into later, is that a big push there is the electric buses, because that's something we have a core responsibility over. We have all the tools to change that as a council, working with Auckland Transport. So that's why it's important to do it, but it's important to know that that's not everything, and that's not, even our water use. We notice with COVID there's also a drought. Auckland Council as a group is one of, if not the biggest water user in Tamaki Makaurau. So us acting as a council and helping the city makes a huge difference for everyone as well. So it's kind of like we need to show leadership and responsibility on emissions and water use and electricity, and making sure our staff and the people who work for the organisation and even contractors have those options to work from home, to change their behaviour, to be incentivised to cycle safely to work, and things like that. Then I know a lot of other businesses are already in that space and are leading ahead of us.
Because I think and partnerships is one of those things that was a key part of developing the plan. So it's been a long process, and one of the things that my team's been trying to do is to make sure that this plan isn't just Auckland Council's plan. And we talked about this a lot. This is about the region doing a whole range of different things across these 8 priorities that we've set. Businesses working differently, central government doing things differently, Mana Whenua, really I guess providing us with some of the insights that they have from Te Ao Māori, the Māori worldview that is so critical to this more resilient future that we seek, and so that partnerships, role or council's role in generating and pulling together those partnerships is probably one of the big things that we've got to do. And obviously you know out in the community meeting a whole bunch of people, you know, do you get that sense that people recognise, you know, we're all in this together?
Yeah, definitely. And I think often people will ask, you know, what is council doing? And it always turns to money. So the 10-year budget, you know, we passed the Te Tarakia Tawhiri in June, so between the two lockdowns, and then we've launched the online, you know, the final version that people can access at the end of the year, at around the same time as we had the mayoral proposal. And the mayoral proposal, you and your team worked a long time with myself and Pipakum, the mayor's office, to get some really good, tangible things the council can do. You know, I guess, how is that for you to try and box what is extremely complex actions that Auckland needs to make into something we need to budget for as a council?
It's a great and it was, you know, an interesting process, a hard process, because, you know, like I said, Te Tarakia Tawhiri was this regional plan, and so really diving into what can council do now, and there's a huge amount that council will need to do over the next, you know, 10 years plus. But what are the really tangible things that we can do now? So the process that we went through with the organisation was saying, look, you know, what are some of the things that not only do we think will deliver climate action, but could also set us up for this future, you know, shifts that we need to see, that transformation that we talked about. And so for me, you know, looking at council's current work, you know, and that was one thing that came through really strongly from councillors, from the discussions was, you know, we're not starting from scratch, hey? You know, we do a lot of work in the waste space. The Natural Environment Target Rate has done a great amount for our biodiversity resilience, which is going to be critical going forward. Water quality is another area that we've done a huge amount of work in. And we are doing stuff in public transport. And I think a lot of people forget, you know, you forget to look back and see where our public transport system was, where our cycling network wasn't, you know, 5-6 years ago. So that was a really good starting point, and saying, well, where can we amplify some of that work? And then what are some of those things that we need to push hard on? So one of those programs around innovation, regional partnerships, which we see in the 10-year budget proposal, sits alongside, expanding our waste networks and thinking more about, you know, the diesel bus phase out. So lots of really cool stuff, but a start. And I think that's the important thing that we need to remember, that here are some things that will accelerate. And I know that was a really big and great direction was, you know, we can accelerate. There will always be more that we can and should do, but this helps us accelerate that action that we need to take.
Yeah, definitely. So in the 10-year budget, people are going to be wanting to know what's in there. So already, as you said, public transport, we went from 57 million trips a year at the beginning of the Super City. 10 years later, we're up to 100 million trips a year, which is huge, but that's only come from the investment. The waste space, as you say, we're going to be expanding. I think it's up to 23 resource recovery, recycling centres, all those community recycling centres to give people those options and also reduce our waste. In there is going to be, first of all, I think the Mayor previously had committed to never buying a diesel bus again after 2025. The 10-year budget will be the cut-off, so we'll never buy another diesel bus. Auckland Transport will, I think, even accelerate faster than what we're looking at with the numbers at the moment, but we're guaranteeing that 50% of our bus fleet will be EV or you know, at least emissions free by 2030. But I'm sure with government support we will ramp, you know, that work up a lot faster. Things like things that have co-benefits. So for our biodiversity, it's things like 200 hectares of native forests in our regional parks. There's 11,000 mature trees in areas that have really poor urban tree canopy. And I think it's 200,000 seedlings a year. So there's really good things in there. You know, Healthy Waters are already doing amazing work, turning old concrete stormwater drains back into their original kind of wetlands, rivers and streams, which has a really positive impact on climate, but also the resilience within communities, so they can see it, like it's more tangible. And
I think that's really important, right? We often, with the climate plan, we're really conscious of, you know, our emissions reduction imperative, like that's urgent now. We need to see emissions curve bend because it was still going up effectively. So that's imperative. People know about that. We all acknowledge that. But the preparing for climate change is also a really big part. And I know in the 10-year budget, there's proposals around coastal hazards and so on, and starting to think. So we know this is going to happen. You know, we want to plan for that 3.5 degree world. We hope we won't get there, but we need to plan for that. So making sure that what we're building now actually can last, can actually survive. You know, increasing sea levels. Greater storms, bigger storms, that we have enough water, which we've seen as a big challenge going forward. And I think that's a really important point to make. Hey, you know, we obviously have this package of climate-focused investment in the 10-year budget, but there's a bunch of other stuff that sits outside it. And I think the Regional Land Transport Plan will be consulted on at the same time, and there'll be stuff in there that will help on our climate efforts as well.
Absolutely, and we've also seen with the climate emergency that we called a year and a half ago, that from that point that the whole organisation started looking, as you say, there was heaps of things already going on, but now climate impact statements on every report. So everything going forward is being acknowledged and looked at. It may not be possible to reduce our emissions or adapt from that one, agenda item or report we have to work with, but at least every part of the council is now thinking all the time, how will this impact climate for Tamaki Makaurau? What are we going to do about it? And I think the Climate Commission, which you might want to talk about now, is around how we respond to that, because the government has kicked us up with the Zero Carbon Act, and they're going to have to show how they're going to comply to their own rules, and we're going to have to be part of that.
And so a really great point about the Climate Commission, and just generally, like, my sense at the end of 2020, it was a big year, it was a hard year, everyone needed a bit of a rest. But with the knowledge that 2021 is going to be critical. So we have the Climate Commission who are issuing their first draft carbon budget. So, as a national level, how are we going to meet these targets that we've set, the commitments we've made under the Paris Agreement? They're going to provide policy advice, so how do we get there as a nation? That's coming in February at the same time as we're looking at this long-term plan. So hopefully that will generate, engage, get people thinking about climate change. And then at the end of the year, we've got the Conference of Parties, so the UN come together and they say, well, how well are we going? Are we actually doing enough? And if not, how do we push this harder? So lots of really important decisions going on, and I think this points to another thing. So we started talking about what can we all do to reduce emissions and so on, but actually the engagement and getting involved and having your say in our long-term plan, our 10-year budget discussion, in the Climate Commission consultation is such a big thing. I feel like how we get the public engaged and enthused around this so that you and your colleagues can hear that come through in the submissions, in your everyday conversations. It's really important, right?
And it's important that every councillor and all the MPs and ministers hear it too, because I hear a lot of, we're not going fast enough, but in other communities it might be, you're going too fast, we're just getting through COVID, things like that. So it's important that people really put out what they want us to prioritise, how much money should we be spending, how fast should we go. But there's also going to be a whole lot of things that the Climate Commission will come out where we don't have a choice, so we just need to act anyway. And I think we're going to have to use this opportunity to explain to the public more about, it's not about if we should do something, it's how fast and when when are we willing to sacrifice other things for our climate.
Because that's a really important point, and we often, from our perspective working in this space, sustainability, climate, it's all about change. Like, we're going to have to change, we're individually going to have to change, businesses will need to change, council, governments need to change. So we've got to prepare for that. Like sitting down and going, oh well, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not. I don't have to do anything. Isn't going to happen because the world around us is moving. You're out in the community. You see a whole bunch of different people. From your perspective, when you're out and people are asking, what can I do? I'm interested. I don't know a huge amount, which is a lot of people. What's your sense in terms of how people can take action on climate change? What's the big thing that they can do?
Yeah, in a council kind of admin-y kind of way, the actions that we need people to make in the next couple of months. So throughout February and March, we want everyone to submit on the 10-year budget. which is basically a 10-year budget for everything, but will include a whole lot. There will be a question around climate change and our actions on that, and also around the rates and how we're going to pay for it. So that's a really important place where people should be giving us feedback on what we are doing or aren't doing. And then there's also, as you said, the Climate Commission. Every individual will have the ability to submit on that as well as an individual or group. And we just want people to, have all those micro actions in their normal life, whether it's, reusing, recycling, using public transport and cycling if they can, reducing those trips. It's the wider, it's speaking to friends and family. It's that advocacy that we can do one by one. Not everyone likes to listen to politicians, but if you're talking to young people, are talking to older people are talking to young people around how we can combat this issue, which is huge. And it's shown through COVID that when we work together, we can really, lock down and all the kind of benefits of looking, okay, I'm probably safe from COVID if I get it, but actually a whole generation might be affected, so we're going to work together to stop this. This is the same as climate change, as we're protecting the next generations and maybe those who aren't even born yet, and it's up to all of us to do that. So,
and I think you hit on a really important point there. So, there's a lot of tools out there, areas that you can start from scratch. All the council's Live Lightly, Future Fit tools are great tools to kind of go, well, where am I now, and how do I reduce my emissions by eating differently or travelling differently? But the point you raise about talking, there's some great research out there that actually talking to your friends, your peers, your family about climate, so we normalise this discussion, because often it's like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, or it's controversial or whatnot. We've got to get past that. We need to talk about it. We need to raise the profile that actually there's consultation going on, and have you seen this? Have you heard about that? That's one of the biggest things that anyone can do, is just to normalise the fact that we do need to act. The costs of not acting are significant. So let's talk about it. Let's have that discussion, and let's be prepared for that debate, because it's really important to have that collective approach to climate.
Yeah.